Welcome again to each and every one of you. It is such a treat to be here as a Sangha, as a community, as a group of folks on this beautiful path. In whatever way you feel that you're on it. So, this is Sunday Sounds of Dhamma program, and that means, as usual, we'll have about half an hour of guided meditation, half an hour of Dhamma talk, and plenty of time for questions, comments, reflections at the end, and then the dedication of merit. And before we get started with meditation, just some announcements as usual. So this coming Tuesday, we have a tour of yokai, Japanese ghosts and demons. It's a very interesting cultural lens. And Zen priests from Japan, from my tradition, were involved in that. A relationship with the yokai. So anyway, that's happening at the Japanese Cultural Center, the JICC, J-I-C-C, not at the embassy, so just to be really clear about that. And please register for it. It's on the calendar on the website, if, just so we know how many people are coming. Also, brunch on the 30th will be hosted by Sachadara, Todd Brown. We're going to have cake because we're going to be celebrating Dassanaya being 5 years old. Woohoo! Yay. Great. And what else? Yeah, all the retreats are open. All the fall retreats are open for registration right now. October, November, December. And I think that's everything I wanted to share about right now. So we can go ahead and begin with the guided meditation. And I thought that for today, we could practice mindfulness of breathing, and just step by step with the intention of really trying to establish the continuity of attention on one thing, on one particular type of phenomena. Okay, so we're going to try that out, and you can see how that goes. So just beginning by establishing your upright and balanced meditation posture. I always like to begin with just a bit of movement, maybe rocking the body or moving the head. So loosen up any tension that you can release right now. And also not leaning toward the computer screen, if that's something that you find yourself doing, just correcting that a bit. Sensing the weight of the body on your seat. And becoming aware of the natural stability of the body. And moving the attention up the torso. Perhaps releasing the muscles around the chest and the ribs. Just leaving plenty of room for the breath to breathe the body naturally. Moving the attention up still further. And relaxing the eyes. And relaxing the mouth. And now choosing one place where you can feel the sensations of the breath. It might be at the tip of the nostrils, the back of the throat, in the chest or the back. Or the echo of the breath down in the lower abdomen. Just resting the attention on one sensation of breathing.
Veces, la verdad, yo me despedí y yo ya estaba lista para...
staying curious about the sensations of the breath, breathing the body. All sorts of other thoughts and sensations might come into awareness. And you can just let them recede into the background, like the radio in the next room. And just keep resting the attention on the feelings of breathing. And having observed the sensations of the breath for a little while, you might check in for any pauses that are happening between the parts of the breath. No need to change them at all. Just staying present for the pauses between the breaths. And then having found the pauses between the breaths, perhaps it's easier to notice the start of each part of the breath. Those times when impermanence is very clear, shifting from stillness into movement. And having found perhaps the start of the breath, the attention can ride along the length of the breath all the way until arriving at a pause. Sometimes you can help it along, help the attention to stay with the breath by, in your mind, adding a little bit of a sigh with each part. Just letting the breath be your whole world for a little while.
டெலிவர் பண்ணிட்டான்.
Beautiful. So that brings us to the end of the meditation period. And now we will move on to the Dhamma talk for today. And as usual, I want to begin with the homage to the Triple Gem. And so this is in the ancient language of Pali. If that's unfamiliar, you can just feel free to let it wash over you or give it a try and stumble through it. All of that is okay. And everyone's welcome to chant along, but folks online, please do keep your mics muted, except for Claudia, who's doing interpretation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhutang dhammang sanghang namasami. There are a great many tools and practices and aids that have been described as part of the path by the Buddha, the historical person who discovered and developed this way of waking up, relieving suffering, and as put into practice and interpreted by people over the centuries. And one of the most important aids is samadhi. Samadhi is immersion of the mind, or sometimes we hear the translation of concentration. So over the course of the summer, I have been giving a series of talks on the Noble Eightfold Path, sort of overview, if you will, of the path. And it's okay if you haven't been to the other talks. But today's talk is about the last, the eighth of the Eightfold Path, and that is Samma Samadhi, right concentration, or you could say sound, as in a sound decision, concentration, or immersion. And it's the third of the three factors, the meditative factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So we have the two factors of wisdom, usually described as coming at the beginning, although there are various other sequences within the suttas, but right view and right intention, which is really about, you could say, understanding the efficacy of action and how intention can inform action in a beneficial way. And then you have the ethics, right speech, right action, right livelihood, the three middle parts of the path. Usually ethics in early Buddhism is understood to be a foundation, something that really has to come at the beginning, that has to be a part of your practice right from the start, so as to help the mind be more calm, less agitated by the consequences of harmful behavior, harmful speech, harmful thoughts. And also to be experiencing the positive results of that in the world, in your relationships. And then the aspects of meditation. So, right, effort. We spoke a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about effort as being about balance and about these bringing wholesome qualities to bear and a full engagement with life, facilitated by the next factor, which is right mindfulness, right? So mindfulness is what makes it possible for us to know what's present in the moment with a degree of openness, you could say, with a degree of neutrality, without judgment, and a kind of receptivity, a gentle receptivity that is willing to accept now. It's like this, like this, like this, each moment. So with all of those aspects, because the path is really not, the Noble Eightfold Path need not be understood as a sequential process. It's actually really these factors all coming together and supporting each other. So with all those factors in support, we come to right immersion. And it's often defined as the jhanas, these kind of very, very focused and settled states of mind. But really, I would suggest that any degree of focus of the mind is helpful. And the reason is because you could say that what immersion is helping us to do is to more clearly perceive the mind itself. Both how mental activity is or is not present, what's happening with mental activity, but also the consciousness itself that knows both our mental state and the material and energetic world, inner and outer. So in a sense, you could say, well, isn't that already happening? Are we already aware to some extent of what's going on? And the answer is yes. Consciousness is required for every moment of experience, and some degree of engagement is what makes it possible for us to know that. it's a particularly human skill that we have, actually. I guess we don't know about animals, but we can know for humans that we can reflect on ourselves. We can reflect on our own mental experience. So concentration enables that. Concentration itself is not reflection or contemplation of any kind, but it enables that because, again, it brings a clarity of perception. So usually, well, let me step back for a moment and say, nowadays, many people say that it's hard to develop concentration. I don't know whether more people or less people than in the past. We can't really say that, right? I think there is always this human tendency to think of the current time as being a difficult time. You know, back in the day, things were better. Right? We've heard that for millennia, really, as human beings. But just to talk about what's happening now, I could say this, that in order to develop a strong focus and settled mind, strongly focused and settled mind, there are several ways that you might want to think about how you live your life, your everyday contemporary life. Because there are aspects that can present themselves that are not super helpful, aspects that are really not going to support your ability to sit down and have a still mind. So one of them is the intensity of the stimulation, right? Overwhelming the body with food, overwhelming the mind with sound, loud sounds, overwhelming the visual sensations. So, one of the things that's relatively new for me in the last 5 years is that Dassanaya has an Instagram account. So I have a little bit of time on Instagram to see what's going on there or to post something. And this way, what they call serving up, it's serving up content, right? It's going, it's like forcing a change of visual phenomena on you. And if you're scrolling, you're making that happen even faster. Right? So, or even just last night, I was out with my family and we were in this environment which is very typical for them. And I, not criticizing that at all, but just to say, we're in this environment where there's food, there's alcohol being served, there's loud music, so loud that you can't hear the person next to you. So the person next to you is talking even twice as loud as they usually do. There's flames coming out of the kitchen. Right? I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stimulation going on, folks. That's an awful lot of stimulation going on. So the baby was there. The baby wakes up. He had been asleep. He had been taking a nap. So I don't know if he fell asleep in the car, if he fell asleep at home. This is my little grandson, Jameson. He's 9 3/4 months old. Wherever it was he fell asleep, it wasn't there. He wakes up and he's looking around like, oh my goodness gracious, what is this? He sees the fire coming out of the kitchen, right? And I think to myself, exactly, it is like that. Like, is that degree of stimulation actually going to help you to sit down in the next moment or an hour from now and have a mind that will completely relinquish mental activity or the body or any sense of agitation? Because that's possible. You might not think so, but that's actually possible. those relinquishments, those letting go of that quality of the mind, to see something else. Huh? So definitely the intensity of stimulation and the way that it's being served up. Oh yeah. And also this, we can easily get into this habit of repeating thoughts, right? So people sometimes talk to me, and I remember talking to my dear, one of my dear teachers, Zenke Blanche Hartman Roshi, about music, repeating in your head, right? Or you have that story about some really painful conversation that happened 30 years ago that you're still playing again and again and again. So this habit of repeating thoughts is something that we can address directly, actually. And the Buddha gave a very, very clear discourse about it. It's a lovely discourse. I want to speak briefly about that. So it's Majjhima Nikaya 20, Middle Length Discourse number 20. And in this discourse, the Buddha very explicitly says, okay, so if you are experiencing thoughts, if you sit down and you pay attention to a sign, meaning you're meditating on some kind of experience, some kind of phenomena, and you experience thoughts of hate or greed, a lot of craving, a lot of wanting, intense wanting, or delusion, a lot of confusion, or a lot of, sometimes it manifests as like anxiety or doubt about what you're perceiving. Then there are 5 ways to go about helping that to stop. Right? So the first way is that you avert your attention to something else, to something more wholesome, instead of the unwholesome states that are arising. That's that greed, hate, or intense anger, you could say, and delusion. You avert to something that's more wholesome. Just shift the mind over to something else. What I want to say about that is, if you're going to do that practice, be very clear about acknowledging what's here first. Don't let it be like a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, I see this thing and I shouldn't be thinking like that, so then I'm going to do something else more wholesome. That's aversion, actually. That's not helpful. That's a way of suppressing, actually, can be a way of suppressing what you don't like about what you see. So you need to really acknowledge first, oh, there's this state of greed that's happening in me, or hate is, a lot of anger is coming up, or a lot of confusion is happening right now. Just give it some moment of acknowledgement before making any kind of a shift. But that first shift can be to something more wholesome. As usual, the commentaries have very specific instructions for us about what might be more wholesome, if it's related to this or related to that. And we could go through that one day, maybe in another talk. But right now, I just want to say, maybe something like loving kindness, or maybe something like just a pleasant mindfulness of the body in some way. There are lots of different ways to think about shifting to something else that might be more wholesome. So that's the first way. It's kind of a replacement theory. The Buddha says it's like knocking out one peg with another peg. And this is one of the suttas in which it's very clear that it's sequential, because then he says, and if that, then you try that. And if that doesn't work, then you go to the next one. And the next one is to what he refers to as see the danger or see the harm that can be caused by the kind of thinking that you're doing, right? So if you're having a lot of anger, then you notice, ooh, how does that feel in your body? Or, what would happen if you were to say that to somebody? Or you think about what are the different ways that why is this unskillful? It's unskillful because it has the potential for creating some harm in your mind, in your body, in the world. So think about why that's not a good way to be thinking. That's the second way. If that doesn't work, so you keep going, right? You still have that story playing in your head, da 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 da, right? Then you try, the third method is ignore. Ignore. So the way I think about this is, there was a period of time in my practice where something like this would happen, and I would visualize myself walking into the next room and closing the door behind me and leaving that story over there in the next room. Okay? Just ignore. And then the next one is this way of stilling the mind or slowing down the mind. And this is one that's very easy to practice. I really like this, the Buddha being extremely practical with us. So by now, you've had a lot of this thought going on, right? And there's probably some physical agitation also that's happening with it. So what the Buddha says is just slow down. So if I was walking, then I would say, oh, why? Let me walk more slowly. Or if I was walking slowly, I would say, well, maybe I will stand still. Or if I'm standing, I would say, maybe I would sit down. And just try to slow down. In a way, it's using the body as an anchor, as a way of grounding and saying, okay, all right, hold on, just sit down, just be here, just be still as best you can. So just slow down. Same thing mentally. So mentally, if thoughts are not engaged with, if thoughts are not commented on, if you don't get entangled in the thoughts, then thoughts can be just like leaves on the stream. They just flow on by. And eventually there will be fewer and fewer leaves on the stream. But most of the time what happens is that a thought pops up and then we comment on that. Oh, it shouldn't be like that. And why did that person do that to me? And da 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 da. Right? So you can also allow the mind to slow down just by not engaging with that additional piece. But finally, he says, and this is the Buddha speaking of from his own experience, because he also mentions this particular practice when he was on his path prior to awakening. He says, but if all else fails, then you crush the mind with the mind. You press your tongue up against your palate, and like a strong man would throw a weaker man down to the ground, you crush your mind with your mind. Now he says, you shouldn't do this often, okay? This is, like if you're going to hurt yourself or if you're going to hurt someone else or if, things, it's an extreme sort of practice. He said, don't do this frequently. But the reason I share it is because for me, sometimes I have had to kind of what I call get strict with myself, right? I see that story pop up again and I'm like, no, no, Or as dear Blanche used to say, I'm not getting on that train. I know where that train goes. I'm not getting on that train. Right? And you have that capacity. You have that capacity. Mm. So just think about that when you have this perhaps kind of barrage of unskillful thoughts or a lot of agitation. There are different ways of handling that, and you could try them out. You could see how that goes. But at some point, having dealt with the kind of general unhelpful activity of the mind, you could settle down to perhaps trying to develop some concentration. And so there are typically, many of you know this already, 5 factors that are said to be necessary for the mind to really settle down to deeper states of concentration. One is, the first 2 are placing the mind and then persisting with the thing. So now, before that, let me step back and say, there are traditionally 40 different objects that you can use for concentration. What you want to do is select one thing and have that one thing be what you're focused on. Concentration is about staying with the one phenomena. So just as we were practicing a little bit in the meditation earlier, right? Let that breath be your whole world, or whatever object it is that you have chosen. We call it an object, right? The phenomena that you're concentrating on. The 3 most common objects are the breath, loving kindness in this big radiating kind of quality filling the mind form, this boundless form, and earth. Earth is called a kasina. It's one of the 10 kasinas. And if you want to know more about that, that's a very, very interesting way. I have to say, I really like that way of doing it. And I think it's, relatively speaking, easy. And I think that it's really nice if you can practice that when you're outdoors. So you can see Middle Length Discourse 121 for very specific instructions about how to do that if you're interested in the earth. So anyhow, you have your object and you point the mind at the object, and then you, as best you can, persist there. So what does that mean? In literal terms, it means moment after moment, the mind is perceiving that object again and again. It feels more continuous than that, and it's supposed to that what you're trying to do is develop a sense of continuity. Eventually, the mind will slow down, kind of like film, like the old kind of movie film, to the point where you can see that the mind is placing itself moment by moment on that same object. But it's fine. That sense of continuous flow is where you want to start with that. So notice that just even the way we talk about this means that you are also, this is also based on having developed your capacity to point your attention at something, right? So we do that quite frequently in meditation. You might not have noticed because it's just kind of baked in there. But for example, if we do a meditation on the sense basis and we say, okay, first go to hearing, then go to smell, then go to the sense of touch. That's what you're doing. You're practicing moving your attention and pointing it at one particular kind of phenomena. So those 2 factors, you put it there, you keep it there, and then you have joy and bliss or contentment. You have piti and sukha comes up. Why? Because it's a relief. Because asking your mind to attend to just one thing is a tremendous relief. And so that joy will start to build up. That relief becomes joy and happiness. Piti is a very stimulated kind of joy. Sukha is a little more calm, said to be like sitting by a cool pond kind of joy. Okay? And then you have ekaggata. Ekaggata is the unification or the focus, the bringing together of the mind. Truly, I will say this. there's a limited amount of that that's necessary in the beginning for concentration, actually. You don't need to have a strong unification at the beginning. That actually will develop over time. But some degree, a little bit of unification is necessary. So the metaphor or the simile that I like to use for this is the mind as an octopus. Right? The mind is like an octopus. It's got all these little arms that are sticky. Oh, look, there's a shiny thing out here, and there's a shell over there, and there's something to eat over here. And right, and it's doing that all day long. Dun, 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 dun. Right? That's the mind. That is unfocused. But as you start to unify the mind, as you start to focus the mind, as you start to settle with allowing that one object to be the primary thing, then the octopus pulls his little arms in. The octopus pulls her little arms in and isn't reaching out and grasping at all these other things. It's just there. And it's just there because of the joy. So that's why the joy is necessary, because of that sweetness of the joy. It will stay for a little bit. So if you're having trouble with developing concentration, I would say, number one, relax. Relax. Number two, practice pointing your attention. Be intentional about how you use your attention, how you point your attention at one thing or another in meditation. And number three, be happy. Find something that brings you joy, that will remind you of joy. There was a bhikkhuni, this lovely woman, elderly woman from Sri Lanka. And now I don't recommend this, but this worked for her, which was the thing that brought her joy was Frank Sinatra songs. So she would play a Frank Sinatra song in her mind before settling down to the concentration meditation. And she was like, yeah, and it works. Boom. Then, 5 minutes later, I'm there. Yeah. So those are the things that come together. When those 5 factors come together, then the mind naturally becomes more focused. There are less thoughts, fewer and fewer thoughts. And it becomes more able to perceive itself. And that's important because, one, it means that we become less and less identified with the body as we become more and more able to feel the mind relating to itself, but also the mind relating to itself can see consciousness in a different way, can see consciousness much more clearly. And this is kind of an art. It's kind of an art. So years ago, I was at a loka vihara. I was at the women's monastery out in California, and I was on a solo retreat. So I was out there in the woods and the yurt by myself for a while, which is really nice. And I was sitting in meditation, and I was babbling to myself about something. I was having some thoughts, just thinking about something, telling a story. And then at some point, I didn't even get to finish my sentence. And the mind got really quiet, like closing a window, like shh. And I remember emerging from that meditation and thinking, I didn't even get to finish my sentence. Like, what was that? Right? But it's because when the factors come together, it's like with like when you turn the lens of the camera and suddenly it comes into focus, like boom, just like that, boom. So really think about concentration, and know that concentration, of course, it's the last of the 8 factors, but it's certainly not the end of the path or the goal of the path, or the point of the path, right? All of this is in the service of knowing and seeing things as they truly are. That's the definition of wisdom in Buddhism, knowing and seeing things as they truly are. This thing, this body, this mind, the world, your friends, your pets, your plants, waking up to the reality that is right here. That's what it's for. And as I have said oftentimes before, you can't even hide it from yourself. It is right here. It's not waiting for you at some point 100 years from now, or some other lifetime, or on the top of a mountain, or in some monastery, or in some book. It's right here. So just see it. All right, friends, that's what I wanted to share today. And so now we have a bit of time, probably 20 minutes or so, for questions, comments, reflections. Yes, Melanie, did you have your hand up? You're still muted, Melanie, sorry. We'll go to somebody else while you sort that out. Okay, hold on. Anybody else have something they want to share? Well, those guys.
There, found it.
Oh, okay, beautiful.
Does the other person want to go? Who's that?
That's okay. Evelyn, you
Hey,
please
Evelyn.
hold on a moment, and Melanie will go first.
Okay, so here's the thing, is that I found myself today, and this happens a lot, okay? I'm sort of processing the thoughts that come up and letting them come and go, okay? Impressions, feelings, noting it, but not judging, trying not to, But sometimes I find when I start to see, like, the thought where I think I'm seeing things as they are, and I keep asking, what happens if there's like things that are happening around me that I find absolutely morally reprehensible? They're immoral, and I can't do anything to stop it, to stop what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
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 These kidnappings of people off the street and taking US citizens, it's morally reprehensible, and I'm not hearing outrage, and it really, really turns my stomach. It is immoral. It's like in the time of the Civil War, slavery was immoral, and there were a few people who didn't, practice it or want it, but then there was terrible repercussions. Like there's this churning. So I guess I don't judge the churning. I note it,
Okay.
but I don't have a process for this disgust, this
Yeah.
gut. It's a gut feeling. It really, and I
Yes.
just sit with.
So, Melanie, let me say this. I can't disagree with you. I think ICE is a terrorist organization. We've been saying that very clearly, at least through the channels that I have to say it. That's how I say it. But what I want to say for you personally, though, is that you have to consider whether allowing that rage to dominate your mind so much that you can't set it down even for a little while when you sit, is that a healthy, wholesome way to go? Does that solve the problem? Does that respond to the problem at all? It doesn't, right? It doesn't. So I would argue that perhaps, maybe not argue, but suggest that giving yourself the space to set all that down for periods of time, whatever periods of time you can, will help you to know better how to respond to that in the world. But carrying that around 24/7 won't actually, right? It erodes your capacity for response. So that's what I mean. That's what the Buddha means when he says, think about the danger, right? So for you, I would say, focus not on the moral aspect, because I don't think that needs to change necessarily what you think, that way of thinking about this, but to focus on the harm of anger in your mind, in your body. How is that causing problems that you could let go of and still retain that view? You don't have to change the view. Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, something to consider there. Something to consider. Okay. All right. Evelyn.
Yes, thank you. I was taking notes about the 5 ways of addressing repetitious thoughts. I want to thank you for addressing that. I had asked a question about it last week too. But on number 5, about crush the mind, I wasn't clear on what the practice is there, the extreme practice. What is that, crushing the mind? What do you mean?
Well, that it was like that example that I gave. It's like if I have a certain story that I see coming up many times, then I would say to myself, no,
Oh,
I'm not going to tell myself that story again. I'm going to do any other thing but tell my story about that again. Like, get strict with yourself in a way. Do you know what I mean?
so how is that different from ignoring?
Right. So ignoring is you could say ignoring is something like you're just sort of letting it slide off, like Teflon mind would be ignoring, right? It just slides off. You're not, in fact, Teflon mind is very helpful for concentration. I should also say that. That's my metaphor for just letting thought go by without actually engaging with it, without actually, this part about what I was saying about not getting entangled in it or responding to it or adding on to that.
Okay.
But just you observe the thought and you're just like, next, 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 next.
So what's extreme about 5 then is just cutting it off.
Exactly. It's what's extreme about 5 is that it's a certain amount of resistance to what's happening in the mind. And generally we try to be, rather than resist
Okay.
or reject or push away anything that's happening in the mind, generally the more mindful practice would be to try to find your harmony with it or try to understand the mechanism behind it.
Okay, I understand better now why that's extreme.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Evelyn, for the question. Yes, Brad.
Was it Melanie that was just talking to to Melanie's point, what came up for me was, I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh, who was very much involved in, anti-war politics and everything else. He had a phrase, he said, they called it bomb shelter practice, and that we all need bomb shelter practice.
Mhm.
When the overwhelm of the outrage starts bringing rage up in us, you got to take a break. You have to have a safe, loving place that you can drop into. Otherwise, you just spin out and become part of the whole rage machine, right? So anyway,
Yes.
I just thought of that as Melanie was speaking.
Lovely, Brad. Thank you for sharing that. And that also reminds me, I don't know if you've read the book, Melanie, or anybody else who is coping with this same feeling, but it's not, is it called At Home in the World, or is that Miguel Rinpoche? There's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh about this period in his life during the war. And he talks about exactly this, how he came to develop a way of practicing with it personally.
It was
What's it called,
Lotus in
Brad?
the Fire. Lotus in the Fire?
It's not that one.
Or not that one? Okay.
He has so many books. It could be in Lotus in the Fire too. I don't know. But in any event, I would try, if I find the reference that I'm talking about, I would try to send it out. But he talks about his time in Vietnam quite a bit in the book, and about exactly this kind of practice. Rad, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Yes, John, here you go. Mind using the mic, I think.
I'm John McLaughlin, for those on here in line. My question is that I noticed, and I'm wondering if it's only me, it's harder for me to settle my mind and concentrate when I'm meditating with a group than when I'm doing it myself, even if it's online and there are people on the screen. And I'm not exactly sure why. I just feel like my mind is more distracted. There's a different energy that takes longer, and I'm just curious if there are any. If
Yeah.
others have that, or if there's a tip to concentrating more quickly.
Well, I would suggest that's a good topic for conversation over tea and cookies later, but I will say this. I mean, we do have a bit of influence on each other when we are practicing together, right? In fact, there's a very old study, I think from like the 80s, where they actually showed that you could get 10 first-time or relatively brand new meditators together in a room, and as long as they were within 10 feet of each other, their heartbeats and their respiration would start to sync up. Not exactly the same, but along the same rhythms. Totally. And the reason why they chose new meditators was because they didn't want people who could actually make that happen intentionally. They wanted people who were just, trying it out, who were just, their bodies were responding to whatever the environmental context was. So we are, I think, having an influence on each other, practicing together. But about it causing more thoughts, I don't know. My first gut feeling about that is probably more like, I would imagine you're just more aware of more thought than you are in other contexts, but I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Over tea. We'll
Yes.
continue that conversation. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes, Julia.
Good morning. Thank you. This was, I put in the chat, wow. I'm sort of responding to Melody's comments again. No, I'm not trying to answer anything for you, Melanie, but I've realized as this topic has been going on is that not only do I have some of the same issues that Melanie has, but I have a family member who is in favor. Actually, I find it phenomenal that somebody can hate Jews and Muslims both, but this person hates Jews and Muslims. I figured that one out. But at any rate, I realize what I do is when I'm meditating. I don't know if I do it other times or not. I probably do to some degree, but I focus on that person and try to, and I know this person quite well. I try to remember just how unhappy that person is. And I think I've spoken before, I have trouble with metta. On a personal, and I've used this person to try to practice metta numerous times. But is this helpful? I tried to get to metta for this person.
So, Julia, what I hear in that, and again, this is just my reflection, I guess it's up to you whether you're approaching metta with that or not. But what I hear in that, in what you're saying, is actually that what you're practicing for that person is compassion, right? So metta is loving kindness, and it's the intention behind it is, may that being be well, or may all beings be well, or may I be well and happy, right?
Yeah.
Happy, oftentimes I like to put that one over to mudita, right? So because mudita is about joy, and it's about, may I have joy, may all beings have joy, and so on, right? So that goes to my mind, to that Brahma Vihara. But then in the middle, we have compassion, and compassion, as defined again in early Buddhism, is quite different in the Mahayana. And the Mahayana takes on a lot more kind of diverse aspects. But as I understand it in early Buddhism, karuna, or compassion as a Brahma Vihara, as a divine dwelling, is this, may beings be free from suffering, may beings be free from harm, may beings be released from the sources of harm and suffering in their lives. So that's what I hear in what you're saying. Like, you're recognizing, oh, that person has suffering in their life, and may they be released from that. May that become something that they could relinquish, or that by my intention I could support in whatever way that suffering to be lessened. So that's the practice of compassion. And the crux of it, always, I would suggest, the crux of compassion is that when we see suffering in the world, whether it's in ourselves or in other beings, when we see suffering in the world, we have basically a choice. We can let it turn us toward bitterness, or we can let it turn us toward softening and compassion. Wow, look how painful that is. That looks really painful.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying the compassion, because I experienced that some time ago. I was trying to work on metta, and this group of people came up in my mind, and I went into the room and I realized that I could feel compassion, but I couldn't feel metta. So you really, thank you so much. You really clarified that, because that's exactly what it is. But am I
and
working?
it's the other side of the coin from metta. So usually we would say compassion is about the relief from suffering, or eliminating the causes of suffering, or preventing the causes of suffering, right? That's compassion. Metta is the other side of the coin that says augmenting the aspects of well-being, increasing the aspects of well-being. Oh, did we lose everybody? We had a little pause there. Or maybe, okay. Did you hear all that? Or was there a freeze? Okay, it was good. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm getting the little sign that says my internet connection is unstable.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Great. Time for one more question or reflection or comment before we dedicate the merits. Yes, Carolyn.
Thank you so much. I have a question about this is kind of like a foreground, background question. When you talk about ignoring the thoughts, because it seems to me like I can get caught up chasing the thoughts around or noticing thought going off, or I can sort of stay with the body and just let the thoughts
Mm-hmm.
be in the background, gently doing their thing, but I'm staying with the body and then kind of waiting for thoughts to come back here home to the body. So, because I think it's really possible to get caught up chasing your thoughts around. Like
Mm-hmm.
I gotta corral it, I gotta bring it back to the breath. But just if I just stay with the body and let it kind of play off. So you do approve of this view?
Sorry, yes, I was nodding my head. Yes, yes, I think that's a very good way to, I mean, basically, again, just putting this into the traditional frameworks that you're familiar with, that where you're going back to first foundation of mindfulness, right? You're saying, okay, I'm going to go back to my first foundation of mindfulness. Instead of being in my third foundation of mindfulness, just keep working the first one for a while until it's ready to move on, right? So, yeah, I think all of that sounds good. And I agree that it can be one of the common misunderstandings about how to work with thoughts is this idea of management. Like we somehow need to manage the thoughts, then manage what's going on in our heads. And I always go back to Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the sutta on non-self, right? This is one of the first three teachings that the Buddha gave. And he says, to the monks, he says, can you say, I want my form body, my physical body to be like this or like that? And the monks say, well, no. I mean, you can say that, but can you make it be so? No, you can't because of impermanence. I always laughed at that because I was like, I can't even make my hair do what I want it to do, let alone like actually have my body be whatever way I want it to be. But similarly for the mind, he goes through all the four other aspects of the aggregates, right? And he says, can you just say, I want my consciousness to be thus? No, one cannot say that. We are subject to causes and conditions. Right? So the idea of management, or I would say this way, the idea of control goes too far, right? We can have an influence, and that's the whole point, actually, is this idea of having an influence, trying to establish the right conditions, trying to learn how to work with what's there. Yeah, lovely. All right, so we are now at the end of our time, and may the beautiful, beneficial karmic momentum and karmic effects, fruits that we have set in motion here today, may be a cause and a condition for our awakening to absolute clarity and wisdom. And may we and all beings be freed from every form of mental and physical suffering. May we and all beings be freed from every form of ignorance and delusion. By the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts, may every being know themselves as Dhamma, know themselves as wisdom and compassion. All right, everyone. Lovely to see you. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Gracias, Claudia. All right.